Hello and welcome to the Boro Breakdown podcast, the opposition preview show with me, Jonny, and my guest for today, Dan from All Stats Aren't We podcast. Dan, how are you doing, mate? Thank you very much for joining me.
I'm feeling pretty good after a pretty solid performance from Leeds last night, and I'm looking forward to talk to you about Leeds, my favourite subject.
It's been a minute, I think, since we last played each other. Obviously, 2019,
Yeah.
you guys did double over us as well, 4-0 and then 1-0. Got promoted under Bielsa as well, and it seemed to be going so well. And then these last few years for Leeds have been just up and down, up and down. So get us up to speed. What's been going on with Leeds United over the last 4 years?
So I don't know where to start. I've got a note here and it just says "auto!" which I think is quite funny. So we went up during the COVID lockdown. So I remember you said we played you and beat you 1-0. I think that was the second to last game before lockdown. I mean, I was there at that game actually in the away end. I remember being there. And so we eventually got up when the season restarted. And our first season in the Premier League was the lockdown behind closed doors season. And we had a good year. We came ninth. Took a few good scalps. Had some real good games. Beat Man City away, sort of got points off Liverpool, that kind of stuff. Beat who we needed to beat, came ninth, thinking, great, right, how do we build from here? And I'm not sure what happened. I think this is where the auto story kicks in, really. We'd spent quite a lot of money in our first season up. I bought a couple of centre halves, we bought Rafinha and we bought Rodrigo. Now, we spent about 100 million quid on those guys. Now, the only one that really, really, really worked was Rafinha. He was fantastic. He was a fabulous player. But the other guys didn't quite work out. Like, we bought Rodrigo to compete with Bamford as a centre forward, but he wasn't the right profile. He was expensive. He was injury prone. It just that didn't quite work, but still became ninth, had a good season. But I guess it meant there wasn't much money for the second year. And then the second season, we didn't kind of fill in the gaps in the squad that needed to be filled in. Calvin Phillips was developing injuries and we didn't have a backup for him. Bamford started to get injured. And like I say, Rodrigo wasn't quite the right profile to fill in for him. So second season was all around like the team just falling apart and injuries catching up on us. I guess it was the fourth season of Bielsa at that point. So, the accumulated fatigue, that kind of stuff, and the performances started to drop. And also, I think it was second season syndrome in the Premier League. Teams started to work out Bielsa's man marking system, and there were like really obvious ways to break it down. Like, we had this system under Bielsa where we would have a +1, -1. So we would, if it was up against the back four, we'd have a front three pressing their back four and one spare centre half. That was how it worked, and the rest of it was man marking. The opposition just knew, like, send a centre half forward, and you can just stroll through the pitch. And then as we're all discombobulated, then away you go. You've got us on the turn, and we just couldn't defend second season. So Bielsa got sacked. Which was pretty emotional. I mean, it was really emotional because we love Bielsa. It was absolute. I'm not too proud to admit I cried a bit when he left. I mean, it was the right. It was the right call, I think, because we were just getting walloped every week. But I love the man, so it was a really hard call. And then for whatever reason, Orta seemed to think that the obvious replacement for Marcelo Bielsa was Jesse Marsch. Now, if you know anything about Jesse Marsch's football, it's if your listeners know anything about Red Bull ball, that kind of very narrow counter press. It's like Orta. The only lesson he'd taken from Bielsa was intensity. He'd not taken any lessons about press. So Jesse Marsch is all about the press, but it was a very, very different press. It wasn't a man-oriented press like Bielsa's. It's a zonal press. It's about compacting the pitch. It's about giving the ball away so you can win it back in a dangerous situation and go. It's Red Bull football, the kind of like Leipzig and Salzburg playing. I think Southampton kind of played that system a little bit under the Austrian coach they had. I forget his name now. Hasenhüttl. They kind of played that kind of style. Yeah, they kind of played that style, and we blagged ourselves to survival. We did not deserve it. I remember the last game of the season we beat Brentford away, and it turns out for the grapevine Brentford were hungover when they played us, so we just completely and utterly blagged like survival. Jesse Marsch clearly wasn't the man. It was awful football. It was really easy to play against. It was like watching little kids play football. They're all like huddling around the ball and chasing after the ball and stuff. It was just like on the ball structures were awful. There wasn't anything. It was all just about playing from the middle and counter pressing. And it's just not a system that worked in the Premier League. But for whatever reason, Orta doubled down on that and said, no, we're keeping Marsch. And basically, we went to Salzburg and just paid fortunes for, Red Bull players, just Aronson, Christensen, the right back. We bought in Tyler Adams, who actually was pretty good. Actually, I didn't mind him, but he was a Red Bull player. We got in not a bad Spanish midfielder called Roca, who was quite a good passer of the ball, but athletically wasn't really up to the Premier League. And we didn't like rectify the centre forward issue. We still went forward with Bamford, who was crocked, and Rodrigo, who was a good footballer, but not suited to playing as a lone nine in a kind of, in a pressing system. So again, we just struggled. And it was obvious from sort of late September, October last season that we were in trouble. And the fans and everyone's calling out, look, move on from Marsh. It's not working. We've got a mini break in January. We've got a few quid to spend. Apparently, we heard, get a good coach and we can rebuild the season. We'll be fine. And all to just double down on Marsh. We went through the World Cup, didn't make a change. January, bought some players in for a lot of money that weren't really fixing the issues that we needed. We brought in Rutter, who's playing for us now, and centre back to come to play left back. It was just crazy. And then 2 weeks after the transfer window, sacks Marsh. So it's just like, what? It's just chaos. It's just like, that's just Victor Orta all over. So we hired Javier Gracia, who's the ex-Watford manager. You might remember Watford played an FA Cup final a few years ago. He was their manager, and he came in actually and turned things around a bit. We beat Southampton, we beat Forest, and we looked pretty good when we beat Forest. I thought, oh, hang on a minute, we're going to survive here. And then for whatever reason, a week later, we played Palace, and we just got walloped 5-2 off the park. It was just like something broke. Palace just worked us out, and that was it. The season collapsed and we went down, and they rolled the dice with Allardyce at the end, which was just a joke, really. I mean, the least said about that, the better. Whatever. I mean, actually, people at Leeds talk quite highly of Allardyce as the way he conducted himself behind the scenes, but he's a dinosaur, isn't he? So, so we just went down, and it was all a bit. By the end, it was just all a bit inevitable, really. So it wasn't such a big blow when it actually happened because I come to terms with it beforehand. So that was that. So we went down, and that brought us into the summer, which was pretty chaotic. So
and it was chaotic, right? Because there's a takeover. Was it going to happen? Was it not going to happen? There was also the aspect of how much would the buyers want to pay for Leeds when if they were to get relegated. There's obviously, you don't have a manager. Victor Orta leaves as well, so this chaos still keeps happening. And obviously, so what was happening in the summer, and then it took a while to appoint Daniel Farke as well. So was this just because of the takeover, or was it just trying to look at different people? What was going on there?
Both. So the takeover, the price and the deal was agreed if we're in the Premier League for whatever the price was. It was big. It was all done. There was no deal for if we went down for the takeover. So the San Francisco 49ers investment vehicle. So it's the 49ers plus some other investors. They've been involved in Leeds for a while now. They've had like 30-40%. So it was them jumping from 40% to total ownership. So they were in there. We had a 49ers guy in the board. But I think they fell out at the end of the season. And Radrizzani, the previous majority owner, was basically trying to buy Sampdoria, and he now owns Sampdoria in Italy. But so he was trying to buy Sampdoria. He was like wanting to hold on to Leeds and not sell them and get them back up. And then he was being forced to sell. And it was all just really chaotic and political. And then he disappeared off to Italy and wouldn't deal with them. And it was just all kind of messy. They eventually got the deal done, but it took a long time. And then it takes the EFL ages to ratify the deal. So there was another month on top of that. So we've pretty much got... So the deal was announced, I don't know, in June or something. But it was kind of pre-season had started just about when the EFL ratified the deal, maybe a week into pre-season. So the first week of pre-season, we didn't have a head coach. It was just the fitness staff taking the players. I mean, that's fine for the first week because they're doing fitness work and testing and stuff. But by that point, we knew Farke was coming in. It was just a case of the EFL ratifying it, so the club could therefore hire him because the new owners couldn't officially hire him until they actually own the club. So it was just a really slow start. So Farke came in, and like, what's happening with transfers? We've got a big Premier League squad of players who are wanting out. For the most part, we've got a new manager in there. We've got some big transfer needs. We've got players that we need to bring in for Farke. We've got players that are desperate to get out, and it just all kind of, it'd been messy. But one thing I want to give Farke credit for is, when he came in, he just seemed to be a very calming hand on the tiller. He came in and it's all messy. He just said, "No, calm down, everybody. We're all, we're going to start. Here's how we're going to play, and this is the sort of transfer dealings I want to do." And it just, all of a sudden, it just calmed down. And I think within a few days of Farke arriving, Ethan Ampadu came in the first transfer, and we're like, "Oh, great, that's a good transfer." And it just kind of felt like, right, okay, we're away now. And it's kind of been pretty good since then, if that makes sense. So it was all very messy. But I guess once we got the takeover done and Farke came in, And then behind Farke, we got a new technical director that came in just after him, and some recruitment staff joined, and what have you. So and it's all kind of calmed down, and it's generally been pretty good since the takeover and since Farke came in, and it's just kind of slowly been getting better and better. So I guess it was turmoil and frustration and waiting, but it was, it was kind of worth it, really.
Yeah, and obviously when things start to settle down, above the pitch and in the boardroom, everything seems to be normalized and working. It's kind of reflect on the pitch, right? You tend to see that, and
yeah,
obviously Farkas came in now, and you've brought a few players in, and the season started quite slowly, right? September was quite a difficult month for you. Do you think it was just a case of players adapting to Farkas' style?
Yeah, I think we had to do it. A lot of our transfer business was late in the window, and we'd lost quite a few players at that point. So there were a few games where we were like putting 2 keepers on the bench, and we didn't have many players, and there was a few injuries. So we just went through that spell where there was not a lot for him to pick. We got beat by Birmingham really early on in a pretty dismal game, and our front line was Jamie Shackleton. I don't know if you know, he's just a sort of ordinary jobbing midfielder. He was playing on the wing. Yeah, Dan James on the other wing, and Rutter up front, and like kids in midfield, and like midfielders at right back. And it was just one of those kind of makeshift teams. We got beat by Birmingham, and it wasn't great. So it was just kind of one of those players were available. We had a couple of players who were trying to force moves, so they weren't taking themselves out of the picture for selection. We had transfer deals kind of that were coming, so it was just a case of the squad wasn't ready. And then we had like a flurry of activity towards the end of the transfer window, and good players coming in by that point. And I think by the end of the transfer window, like, oh, okay, we've got quite a good squad here. It's not perfect, but all of a sudden it's a full squad. He's got options. He's got players he can rotate. So I think it's just a combination of that and, him getting his ideas across, and I guess Farke getting to know the squad and getting to know what they can do. I mean, we'll talk about tactics in a bit, but I think he came in with some ideas about how he wanted to play. And he's had to adapt his ideas a little bit. He's got his ideal Farke vision of football, I think, and he's had to adapt a little bit to the squad he's got. So, a combination of all those things, really.
Yeah, I'd be really keen to hear about Farke-Ball because, if you're looking at Leeds United this season, just in terms of like underlying numbers, you're second for expected goal difference. You've got the best defense in the league in terms of expected goals against. Lowest for long balls as well. It's different from what Bielsa was bringing maybe 4 years ago to now, but it still seems really effective. So how does Farke-Ball look for you at the moment?
So I sometimes think it's worth thinking about what Farke wants to do as an ideal and how he's had to adapt. So if you cast your mind back to the Farke's first Norwich team that went up as champions in 18-19, if you can remember that season. So it's Bielsa's first season at Leeds because they pipped us for going up that season. And I think you had Pulis in charge at Boro, so you were pretty strong.
I try and avoid that. I try and avoid that period of my life. The football was that bad, to be honest.
You were pretty effective though, weren't you? A good team, that Pulis team. That was solid, weren't they? In a kind of functional way. I remember Leeds giving Bielsa's Leeds 2 tough games. It was 2 draws that year.
Yeah.
If you remember rightly. Wasn't it the one where Jack Clark collapsed and there was like quarter of an hour of extra time, injury time? Do you remember that game? And we equalised later on. Well, I was at that game, and I went with a fan who's the pal of mine who's a Boro fan, and I was in the Boro end for that game, and I had to stifle a cheer when we equalised later on. So that's my confession. But so if you go back to that season, that's classic Farke, I think, and he tried to implement that style at Leeds. So if you remember at Norwich, they were like a 4-2-3-1 team. They had Pookie up front. Wendy was the playmaker, but he played right wing. But he was very much a kind of a drifting infield 10, really. Max Aarons was the right winger, really, from right back overlapping. They had Onel Hernandez on the left, who you guys will know because he played for Boro. He was the kind of touchline hugging winger on the left. Obviously, Pookie stretching in behind. So it was this kind of lopsided kind of system with like a touchline hugging winger, a kind of playmaking winger coming in field, a right back bombing past. The number 10 was Steepemans, who was kind of more of a box crashing 8 really than a kind of classic 10. So he would arrive and score goals. So I think that's kind of classic Farke, what he wants to play. And it was quite intense, fairly possession heavy, fairly aggressive in the press, but not kind of ultra aggressive, and they scored lots of goals. They weren't the best defensive team. And I think he tried to implement that style at Gladbach when he was in Germany, and it didn't quite work there, I don't think. But then he came to Leeds and tried to implement the same thing, but he didn't quite have the personnel for that kind of system. He didn't have a Buendia for a start. We don't really have a Buendia at Leeds. We don't have a Pookie. We tried to buy Cameron Archer actually this summer, but I think he was just too expensive. I think Cameron Archer might have been quite a good Pookie analog, really, kind of like running in behind, stretching the defence in behind. That would have worked quite well, but we couldn't get him. So we ended up with Perot, who is probably more closely aligned to Akpom, actually, kind of like a second striker, kind of goal scoring from the kind of 10 position. So he's kind of had to adapt his attack. So we've kind of the Archer role, if you like, the stretching the defence, or the Pookie role, is kind of done by our wingers. So Dan James and Somerville were kind of running behind from the wing, and they're kind of coming quite narrow. Our centre forwards tend to drop off and create and play make and arrive late. So it's kind of a different order. So you've got to think of how he sets his forwards up in terms of roles rather than positions. Like our main goal scorer is our 10. Our main creator is Rutter, who plays at 9. You know, he's a creative player. He's not a goal scorer. Our kind of running in behind guys that stretch the back line and give us depth to our attack are our wingers. Our left back is the one that's bombing forward rather than Max Aarons, who was the right back for Norwich. So that's the kind of general shape. But so it's kind of somewhere between, I guess you could call it a 4-2-3-1 with Pirot at 10, or you could call it a 4-4-2 with Pirot as a second striker, however you want to call it. So, and but what we try and do is we're not the best, I don't think, at kind of holding possession for long periods and breaking teams down systematically, like in a heavy possession team. We don't really have that kind of a Pablo Hernandez or a Buendia, like Spanish people will call it. They don't have that pauser, that kind of, they want to get on the ball and create and dictate things. We don't have that. We're all about kind of transition and like moments, like really nice combination play at speed. So like our main creator is Rutter, who's a 20-year-old guy who can carry the ball for days and got a nice pass off a dribble. Somerville, great dribbler. Dan James, quick. Perot is the finisher. So what we tend to do is we tend to have a system where we try and draw people in. It's a little bit like what Brighton do. We'll step on the ball at the back, and try and draw people in, and then we'll like invite the press, and then we'll launch, and it almost looks like a counter attack, even though we're in possession. And then we'll rotate from there. And we have some quite nice. We're quite good at building from the back, where the fullbacks will run inside and create an open lane and try and drag their winger away from the touchline, so there's an open lane to the winger, and we can play out and then up the field and stuff. So we're quite good and quite inventive at building from the back and and drawing teams onto us. So we do tend to prefer a team that will come at us and press. Excuse me, and create those transitions. And another thing that Farke has shown, it's not something he's necessarily shown in his previous coaching career, is we're quite good at pressing. He's quite good at setting pressing traps. So again, we'll win the ball on the halfway line. So if you look at the third goal we scored against Swansea on Wednesday, it was Sam Barham stepping into midfield, winning it on the counter, playing Rutter in, who then carries it forward and lays it onto Dan James, who's the furthest forward, almost, kind of thing. So, and Rutter's our centre forward, picking the ball up on the halfway line and feeding the winger, who's the furthest forward. You can see how it's the roles vary, kind of thing. So, it's all about kind of generating through pressing, or pressing traps in midfield, or artificial transitions from drawing the opposition on. That's how we create. So, if teams sit back and don't come onto us, that's the worry. That's the weakness in our attack. But if teams come at us, I'm always happy that we'll make chances.
Yeah, and I think we said on your podcast that this game could be pretty much all about a transition, because I think Boro can be quite similar in a way. I think we're very aggressive. We can be aggressive if we want to be, when we want to press. I think I was saying the first time I seen Middlesbrough actually control the game without the ball was against Leicester. Be keen to see if we did that again against Leeds, because I think if we were to try and dominate, and if it's a game of transition, it becomes a basketball match. I feel like this could be like such a difficult game for us. I think it's going to be a difficult game anyway. But I think obviously you're saying if a team was to sit back, that's where you cause the biggest problem. So would you say that like creating chances like probably like one of the difficult things for you guys?
Yeah, we don't really have those kind of automations that you see from the really elite like positional play coaches. It's just sometimes if we're up against a block of 4 and a 5 or something, and they're all sat in positions, and we're trying to break them down, it stops, and it's almost like everyone's looking at each other. What do we do now? There's no space. So what? To be fair, at the start of the season, that was a real big problem. Now what we do is we just go back. It'll just go back to the keeper. We'll try and draw you out and play and switch it around. So we're getting better at drawing people out now, and we've got kind of, I guess we have, rather than passing moves to break a defense out. We've got method for drawing people out, if that makes sense. It's a different approach.
Mm.
Yeah. So, like for example, last Friday we drew with Rotherham. It was a mad transition first half. We went in 1-1, which was we just gave a really soft goal. Second half, Rotherham just sat, and we just couldn't,
Got
I mean, we
down.
did, yeah, we scored a goal. It was just offside, and we should have had a pen, but all that kind of stuff. But we didn't create tons, to be honest. Considering the kind of quality and differential between Leeds and Rotherham, we should have done. And it was a real big problem. Whereas yesterday against Swansea, who came out, we generated 2.5 xg, and Swansea are way better than Rotherham. So it's just it depends. Styles make fights, don't they? A little bit. That's the kind of the old boxing adage. I think it's true of Leeds, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's definitely. I think when we were looking at Preston, probably for us on the Tuesday, like they might cause a lot of teams problems, but they didn't cause us one. Like you saying, stylistically, I think we just didn't match. Or Law, I felt like Law set them up really expansive, and for a team that plays through the thirds quite comfortably, it just felt a bit like suicide. But just in terms of players that are obviously for Leeds this season, you have kept some players that you've came down from the Premier League with. And some of them started really well. I think Somerville is probably one of the key players. I think has been excellent so far. Joe Boro has been excellent too. So who would you say are like the key players for Leeds in the current system, and also players who we should potentially look out for and who are like kind of underrated?
Yeah, so I mean the two superstars are Rutter and Somerville. I mean they're ridiculous. That if we don't go up, they're going up type thing. But the front four is it's a nice front four because they're sharing the goals as well. We're not relying on one guy to make it tick. So Rutter's got 4 goals, Perot's got 7, Somerville's got 7, James has got 5. So it's like a nice spread. They're all chipping in with assists as well. They're all rotating and playing really well. So it's kind of a really nice fun 4, and it gets us out of trouble a lot. Even if we don't play well, those guys get us out of trouble. So, but I kind of think that they're well-known guys, aren't they? They're well-known players that everyone knows they're good. They're not the unknown ones. I think probably the best, least heralded player is probably Pascal Struijk, the centre-back. Really nice left-footed passing centre-back. Big, strong guy. I think he's got the highest progressive passing yards in the Championship, or second in the Championship this season. So he's the guy we build through from the back. Yeah, he's just really good. He's the guy that build, and he's got a nice partnership with Rodon, left foot, right foot. They're both big guys. Rodon's kind of the more athletic, quick guy that covers behind. Struijk's not the quickest. That's his weakness, I guess. Yeah. Struijk's really kind of wins his duels. He's a big unit. He wins his duels when he comes up. Like I say, he's left footed, good pass of the ball. So he's really they're a kind of nice, effective pair at the back. And Ampadu and Kamara are just starting to form a really nice central midfield partnership. So it just feels like a really nice spine to build from. Yeah. I mean, Ampadu is probably the signing of the summer. I mean, I absolutely love that guy. He's an absolutely fantastic midfielder. Another one, probably alongside Somerville and Rutter, who, if we don't go up, he goes up, because I think someone will pick him up for good money. So that's the really strong. I mean, in terms of players you've not seen a lot of yet, Archie Gray, the young kid who's making his way this season. I think he's got a lot of high potential. He's playing right back at the moment. He's a centre mid really, but he's playing right back. But the right back is the less adventurous in the current system of the full backs, if you like, and he'll just tuck into midfield. So he gets involved in midfield play quite a bit, which is his natural game. But he's really good in kind of one-on-one duels and stuff. So he's really, like, we played Leicester the other week and he handled Mavididi, and and he's a 17-year-old kid, set the mid playing right back. And I mean, Mavididi gave him a hard time for the first half, if you like, and then Gray got on top of him, and it's just, I just think it's obviously a really good kid. So they're the ones that stand out really. It's the kind of good spine, and then the fun 4, if you like. That's where we are. I mean, weakness is probably full back, I would say, is where we kind of weak. Like I say, we're playing a kid at right back. We've got Sam Byram at left back, who's a right back, and is injury prone. So that's where we're weak, I guess, in comparison.
Yeah, there was a moment as well, I think, for Sam Byram, when you mentioned there, where obviously he left and went to Norwich, right? I think of all teams, and then obviously
West Ham.
I think Leeds boy.
He's Leeds boy.
Leeds boy, and obviously came back and scored, and it was just a nice moment. I think with the fans as well when he scored earlier in the season. But I just want to move on to the weekends. Obviously weekend now, and this is a really interesting game. I know we mentioned it there in terms of stylistically and how the game might fare out. But obviously, a nice little factor is that the top two sides for created chances, like big chances this season, are Leeds and Boro with 44 and 40 respectively. The last time Boro beat Leeds at Ellen Road was in 2011. So the omen is sorry,
It's
true.
due then. It's due, yeah.
It could be, but I was there that game where I was one. I think it was a pretty nuts game. I think it was a couple of red cards, and then Marvin Emnes scored, and we ended up winning under Tony Mowbray, which is just a bit of an odd game. To be honest, it was a very odd game. But we'll move into it. So, where do you think the game is going to be won and lost?
So, like you said, you're kind of it's transition. Leeds trying to generate those transitions, and I think you said to me the other night when we had a chat on my podcast, you kind of worry about Boro's defending those transition moments. So, so what happened against? It's interesting what happened against Swansea last night. We had Ampadu and Kamara, and Swansea kind of actually overloaded our midfield. They got swamped a bit, really. I mean, credit to Swansea, their setup was really good actually, and the way they kind of played through. And it wasn't until we kind of got hold of that situation second half that we really started to generate a lot of transition. So I think it's a lot of like dominance, and then we were able to transition as we wanted. So I think it's really important from a Leeds perspective that those two get on top of. I'm presuming it'll be Howson and Barlasser in the midfield for you guys.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah,
Hackney's injured,
unless Hackney is miraculously improves in the next couple of days, I can't see it. So it will be Howson and Barlasser. So for us, it's legs in midfield, which I could be a bit concerned about, to be honest.
Well, that's what I thought. I thought Howson's a wonderful footballer. I love Jonny Howson. I mean, obviously remember him coming through at Leeds as well, but yeah, he doesn't have legs anymore, does he? He's a technical player, isn't he? But he's not an athlete as such.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I wonder what will happen then if Kamara and Ampadu can get on top in that respect. Then perhaps we can do some damage. But if you recognise that and somehow tweak that tactically and can kind of can get on top of us in midfield and turn that around and stop us sort of getting that platform for our transitions, then you could really do some damage, I think. So like Swansea did, and I think you've got a lot more firepower than Swansea had. So if you can, your analysts look at the way Swansea kind of bogged us down in midfield and add some firepower, add some threat to that which Swansea lacked, which I think you wouldn't lack, you could have some joy. So there's a blueprint there.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think whether we hit that or not, I'm not too sure. We've got a lot of injuries, but I think the injuries on Tuesday for us was quite a bit of a blessing because you get to see other players come in, try new systems, and also Morgan Rogers on that left hand side thought, you know what, it will create problems probably at the weekend. Right. So obviously we'll see that, given that Sam Greenwood is not occupying that left free roam role, which were you saying there, like around like the team and like the similarities and just in terms of like roles and where like players will try to come in, try and create overload centrally. So it could really be a game where like we kind of cancel each other out to some extent.
Yeah.
But prediction wise, obviously everyone comes to this podcast for the score predictions, most likely. So what are you going to go for for the score prediction on Saturday?
I'm proper like I'm not overly keen on predictions because football is just so volatile, isn't it? It's such like a random game, low scoring game. We're good at home. Our home form's pretty solid. We're unbeaten this year. Like we had a couple of draws at the start, but it's been all wins since then. I fancy us at home. Always fancy us at home, and we've got everybody's fit at the moment. So I'm going to say Leeds are going to nick it 2-1. It's going to be a kind of a good competitive game, but I think we'll just come out on top. That's my prediction.
Yeah, I'm going to go 2-2. I think.
Yeah,
I think we'll just snatch them at the end. I feel like, and it'll feel like a win, but it's not. But my final question for you, Dan, is where can people find your podcast?
Just go online and just look for All Stats That Way on Twitter, or X as we call it now. For All Stats That Way, we're kind of fairly active on there. We sometimes do Twitter Spaces before the game, just after the team news is announced. So some of the guys will just come on there and talk about the team news and talk about the opposition. And we put out a couple of podcasts each week. So just go to your normal podcast provider and look for All Stats, aren't we? So that's where we're at.
Yeah. Brilliant. Dan, thank you so much for coming on as well. I really enjoyed having to speak to you twice in 1 week as well. So it's been really, really great to catch up. But for right now, this has been the Boro Breakdown podcast, and that was our opposition preview show about Leeds United in a podcast. Up the Boro Breakdown.